specific.
Committee members, if you could take your seat, please. And if the media could, or the cameras could leave, please. Thank you. We'll commence with meeting number 10, studying the freeze on departmental budget envelopes and government operations. And we have before us members from the Canadian International Development Agency, Mr. David Maloney, the Executive Vice President, Mr. Jim Quinn, the Chief Financial Officer, and Madame Christine Hogan, the Vice President, Strategy Policy and Performance Branch. And I understand, Mr. Maloney, you have opening remarks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to yourself and the committee for this opportunity to address the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. As the Chair has said, I'm joined today by colleagues from CEDA. Madam Chair, I thought it might be useful for committee members if I took a few minutes at the outset to provide an overview of CEDA's budget, what we're doing with these funds, and how we are working to use them more effectively and efficiently. As committee members know well, CEDA works to achieve our strategic outcome, is set out in our main estimates and detailed in our report on plans and priorities, namely the reduction in poverty for those living in countries where the Canadian International Development Agency engages in international development. To do so, we have approximately 1,950 employees, with roughly 170 of them posted in 49 countries, working with local governments and several hundred Canadian and local partners, as well as international organizations. These people deliver total programming, as proposed to Parliament this year, of $2.9 billion. To support our operations, both at home and in the field, we count on an operating budget of about $230 million. This total budget of $3.2 billion is drawn from the government's international assistance envelope, which Budget 2010 announced would be capped at its 2010-2011 level going forward. CEDA currently draws about 2/3 of that envelope. Looking specifically at our operating budget, Madam Chair, 70% of the expenses consist of salary, while 30% is for other costs, which include travel, training, and professional services. Like all other government departments, CEDA is reviewing its expenditures in order to do its part to implement the government's three-point plan to return to a balanced budget by 2014-2015, as announced in Budget 2010. In light of the directive to freeze departmental operating budgets at the 2010-11 levels until 2012-2013, CEDA will absorb any wage and salary increases established by collective bargaining agreements applying to that full 2010-2013 period. Les employés de l'ACDI recevront l'augmentation.
CEDA employees will receive the planned increase in wages for 2010-2011, which the Expenditure Restraint Act and collective bargaining agreements have set at 1.5%. To cover these salary increases, CEDA will find additional efficiencies within the existing operating budget. In particular, in order to effectively absorb the wage and salary increases, which we estimate for 2010-2011 at $2.2 million, against total salary commitments of $153 million. CEDA will continue to scrutinize and tighten all operating expenditures, which include both salary and non-salary spending. Madam Chair, reducing operating funds obviously means that we at CEDA will have to be more strategic in how we go about all of our business, ensuring that we're getting the most out of every dollar spent. We believe that we are well positioned to do so because this is an exercise in which CEDA has already been engaged for quite some time. In fact, we recently launched an ambitious business modernization initiative to transform the agency's operating model as one key element of a more effective, efficient, and accountable delivery of Canada's International Development Program. Within the context of this initiative, we are decentralizing programming responsibilities to the field, which ensures CEDA's operations and associated roles, experts, authorities, and accountabilities are located where they will most effectively and efficiently contribute to the agency's mission and mandate. Other components of our business modernization initiatives include the re-engineering of our business processes to sharply cut the time we take to develop new programs and projects and to respond to funding proposals. This means gains from our programming and recipient countries. This means gains, rather, for our programming partners and recipient countries, and it also means higher levels of productivity and value added from CEDA employees. We have already achieved very significant improvements in key lines of business and are pressing ahead.
Of the government's aid effectiveness agenda to strengthen the focus and effectiveness, efficiency and accountability of Canada's aid dollars. Regarding focus, Minister Oda announced in February of last year that 80% of CEDA's bilateral aid would go towards 20 countries, meaning that the bulk of our bilateral programming is now going to areas where it can make the most difference. This is our largest line of business and represents just over 1/2 of our program dollars. Another third of our funding goes through multilateral organizations, and here too CEDA has refocused funding on institutions that are effective and aligned with the Government of Canada's priorities. In terms of thematic focus, Madam Chair, last May, the Minister outlined CEDA's priorities for international development. These are to increase food security, to secure the future of children and youth, and to stimulate sustainable economic growth. Given the nature of CEDA's business, we must be able to adapt to global circumstances, such as natural disasters, economic instability, or geopolitical crises. Our approach in Haiti, for example, had to change fundamentally after this January's earthquake, moving from primarily development objectives to ones of humanitarian assistance, recovery, and reconstruction. There are also good news stories, countries that progress to the point of generating their own tax dollars to finance their development and no longer needing ours. In some, development institutions are all in the business of shifting program and operating budget dollars to the areas that require immediate support in light of changing global circumstances. The same logic applies in today's climate of fiscal restraint, and specifically with respect to the directives laid out in Budget 2010. The measures I have outlined here today demonstrate CEDA's commitment to managing its spending well, while still realizing successes in the delivery of the Government of Canada's mandate as it relates to international development. CEDA will live within its means. We're happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. And we will go with the first round of questions. Madame Hall-Findlay, Mr. McKay.
Chair, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, witnesses, for coming. You said, Mr. Maloney, that CEDA would do its part. It seems to me that CEDA is being asked to bear more than its share. I'm just looking at page 164 of the budget, and it says savings measures of about $17.5 billion, of which $4.5 billion will come out of international assistance, and based upon your budget of about $4 billion, give or take, that's a pretty serious amount of money to lose over the next number of years and not be able to spend on international assistance over the next number of years. And it seems disproportionate to any other contribution by any other department or agency. You know, the National Defense is contributing $2.5 billion on a budget of roughly about $100 billion over the same period of time. Containing administrative costs, $6.8 billion, and I don't even know what that would be. That would be probably in the hundreds of, certainly hundreds of, well over hundreds of millions of dollars. So, so my first question to you, Mr. Maloney, is this is an enormous amount of money that you are walking away from, of which CEDA, is contributing about 2/3. Can you tell me how that will be proportioned between your agency, CEDA, and the other departments? Who else will be asked to share in this quote-unquote burden of reducing the $4.5 billion?
Well, certainly I can confirm that CEDA does account for about 2/3 of the international assistance envelope. By way of comparison, the Department of Finance and the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade each account for 8 to 10% of that envelope. IDRC, the International Development Research Center, accounts for about 3%, and then a variety of other government departments account for the balance. So we are not in a position to be able to. It would be speculation to say what might have been done should the international assistance envelope have continued to grow beyond the current fiscal year. So I can't comment on the split.
I'm not asking you to comment on it, but my recollection of the Department of Finance's budget was something in the order of about $80 billion. DFAID's budget, I don't remember what that is, and yet their proportion of contribution, particularly with respect to finance, is relatively speaking minuscule compared to what CETA is being asked to contribute to these projected savings. Is that a fair comment?
I can't offer any comment on the government's decision regarding the program dollars. I can confirm that on the operating side, the approach with CETA is the same as all other departments.
But it is an accurate observation, would you say?
I'm not going to comment on the program dollars element.
Now, you also indicate that you will be doing some internal savings as well. It looks like your actual spending in the fiscal year 08-09 was $414 million, and you're dropping that to $229 million, roughly $230. So that's a very significant drop in your operating budget. Meanwhile, you're refocusing from basically the desperately poor countries in Africa to the slightly less poor countries in South America and Central America. So who gets dropped out of all of this?
The figures I believe that the member is referring to are not in respect of any of our programming dollars, but rather in CETA's operating vote, comparing our operating vote from 2008-09 to the operating vote that's currently in front of Parliament through the main estimates for 2010-11. There is a significant decrease from 2 years ago to this year that is overwhelmingly due to a one-time technical revaluation of liabilities related to exchange rate adjustments. That amount was in excess of $163 million.
So when you talk about other subsidies and payments, that's what you're referring to?
That's right. It was payments that were owing that were on the operating side. There is, in fact, a modest reduction, much more modest in the range of 5% or so, that has to do with the fact that the government has, for a number of years, several of the last budgets, been pointing to the need for administrative efficiencies, which, as I alluded to, is part of the aid effectiveness agenda. So CETA has been working hard to be more efficient, to work smarter, but these are very much more modest than the amount that you were talking about.
Well, so in effect, if I add that $163 million back into your 2010-2011, it's roughly a status quo situation. Is that
very close?
That's fair.
Very
okay.
close.
So the reality then, therefore, is that there is no actual reduction in CETA's operating budget. What the reality, therefore, is that the transfers in the international assistance envelope are being significantly reduced.
They will grow. They will not grow against a status quo projection of some considerable increces of the order.
Well, that was in the order of about 8% on an annual basis, was it not?
They have grown for 8% for the last 10 years,
yeah,
including this year.
So how much further behind our 0.7 does this put us?
The OECD came out this week. Last week with updating Canada's official development assistance relative to gross national income at 0.32. 0.33, I'm sorry, which is a status, which is...
last question for you, Mr. McKay.
And so that was unchanged.
One final question. With respect to the Minister's ever-changing set of priorities here, I believe this might be the 6th or 7th or whatever number of priorities that ministers over the last numbers of years have had. Yours is food security and children and youth, et cetera, et cetera. What does this have to do with the only legislated mandate that you have, namely the Better Aid Bill, which is passed in 2008? How, in heaven's name, does this have anything to do with poverty reduction, with taking into account the perspectives of the poor and our commitment to international human rights?
Very briefly, I'd point to the report that Minister Oda tabled before Parliament prior to September 30th of last year, which indicated how CEDA was living up to the legislation.
Yes,
Thank you.
I read it.
We now go to Madame Bourgeois for 8 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen and Ms. Hogan, welcome. The International Development Envelope funds CEDA's programs and other international aid programs. Several departments, I think, receive money from this envelope, including DFATE, Finance, International Trade, CEDA, and IDRC, rather. How do you share this envelope, this $5 billion? Well, ultimately, this decision is made by Cabinet. All ministers together make this decision. Every year, including this year, the budget was increased by $364 million. So the various departments present proposals for their colleagues, and based on the government's priorities, that's how the funding is broken down. So if I understand correctly, if the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, since the current government has no current international development policy under DFATE, and so if DFATE decides to assign a priority in a certain sector, CEDA, who is a partner organization to all of these other departments, will have to give back some money, if you will, or will receive less money because DFATE would receive more if that became a government priority. Well, yes and no. What it means is that in recent years, ministers had about $350 million, and the various departments and ministers had and still have the opportunity to present their ideas and projects. Ultimately, it is the Prime Minister and his ministers who decide how the money will be broken down. Thank you. I just want to come back to the famous 0.7%, which is the goal if we are to match G8 and G20 commitments. We have seen the Millennium Objectives, and Canada has committed to 0.7%. However, with this departmental budget freeze, how is CEDA going to make sure that this goal is reached? We're still at 0.3%, 0.33%. So in fact, we're going down every year. So what can we do to reach this goal of 0.7%? Well, I would say that CEDA's role is to manage its funding as efficiently and effectively as possible, and it must do so with the funding it has been allocated by the government. So it's not up to us to attain the percentage per se. It is us to spend our money as best we can. Thank you. I have a related question. In your brief, at the last paragraph, you said that you would shift program spending to areas that require immediate support. I've been an MP for 10 years, and I've followed CEDA's activities over the years, and in some countries, CEDA has done excellent work, and it's established development benchmarks for the future. However, it seems that this will cease, and that you are going to focus on more immediate needs. Don't you think that this is subverting the first mission of CEDA and the thing it was best at, which was to implement medium and long-term projects? How do you personally deal with the situation? You've been there for years, and it seems that everything you've worked so hard to achieve over the years is being undermined. Well, as I said, more than half of CEDA's budget is spent on bilateral programs. In the most cases, these programs foster long-term sustainable development abroad. But part of CEDA's budget is spent on humanitarian aid, emergency aid, and some years, such as 2008, 2009, something happens. There was that major earthquake in China, and a cyclone ravaged parts of Burma. This year, of course, there were several earthquakes in places around the world. And so, as a result of these events, our priorities change. Sudan has immediate, urgent humanitarian needs. And all these events happen in parallel to our long-term planning, our long-term projects. So we continually have to rebalance our priorities depending on events which happen in the world. Lastly, you're going to lose more than half of your budget, if I understood correctly. So your operating budget will be cut in half if you need to absorb many other expenses over the coming years. Did I understand that correctly? No. Our budget has not been cut. But your budget will be cut back or will fall because you're going to have to absorb salary increases for your employees and many other expenses. So as far as I understand, you'll be losing several $1 million in the long term. Salary increases represent only 1% of our operational budget per year. So really, it has no impact on our programming budget, which represents 93% of our total envelope. So the $2.2 million refers to our operating budget. And $200 million are affected.
This isn't the first time that you've been here, but it's the first time in this capacity, and thank you for coming, and we appreciate your testimony whenever you do come. I was sharing with you before committee started that I spent some time in Kenya this past summer and had an opportunity to see the folks on the ground, and I was there actually in a private capacity in my effort with a local organizing group from my community to alleviate some of the poverty and the famine that had developed as a result of a 2-year famine that had stretched over a good portion of Kenya and some of the surrounding countries as well. And we did see folks on the ground. We saw the effective services that they were providing, and it was interesting. I had an opportunity to meet with some of the CEDA officials at the High Commission there, and at that point they were negotiating, I think, with other countries a partnership that would work to alleviate some of the hunger that had been developing. And we heard the announcement shortly after we returned to Canada that there was an allocation of about $30 million going towards that immediate alleviation of hunger and the feeding of those people. And I can't express to you my thanks enough for those dollars, because we did actually see and witness young kids that were in effect starving to death, and we were working to do our part. But when CETA was able to come forward with those funds and the partnership that was developed with other countries, that truly made the difference. And I heard from the folks on the ground that were still there after we left, that in fact that food did come at the right time, and many lives were saved. And so we salute the folks within CETA and their foresight and their ability to maneuver when the time presents itself. And I think that's one of the most important things that I gained from your testimony. When I did hear that there was going to be a reduction in the time that that CETA was going to work to facilitate some of these agreements and different things, I wonder if you could speak specifically to the effort that's being made to sharply cut down on some of the timeframes that are allocated for the decisions to get this aid out, and exactly how that will affect the service that CETA is able to provide for people on the ground.
Well, thank you. It's an excellent question. We're glad to talk about it. Jim and I especially spend a lot of every week on this. I think the very last part of your question is important. What we're trying to do is ensure that we're able to move more in a more timely way to respond to needs. For the past 2 or 3 years, in fact, the part of CETA that works specifically with Canadian NGOs and civil society organizations has undertaken a very major review of its business processes, literally who does what, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and has gone through and has cut down very sharply the number of steps, the number of approvals, the amount of paperwork, and has taken somewhere between 50% and 60% of the time out from measuring from when a proposal is received. This is responsive programming, so an NGO would apply for funding, and the time to get a yes or a no answer has been reduced by, as I said, by over half. So that then allows our partner organizations to work in something closer to real time to be able to move. We've now taken that same approach and we've moved it over to those larger program areas. As I said, we're working more country to country, which is more than a half of our budget, and we have just officially launched, after again a year and a half's worth of work, 4 pilot projects where we've gone through, and this is what we call directive programming, where CETA is coming up with a project, working it up. We put out requests for proposals for bids from, be they NGOs or private sector organizations, international organizations, to actually implement a specific project. A current example, which Minister Oda just spoke to in Port-au-Prince in recent weeks and days, was to build a hospital in Gonaive, which is a hospital that had been replaced a hospital destroyed 2 years ago. That we are taking again that same, in this kind of programming, we think we can take out 60% of the time, 65% of the signatures, of the approvals, of the documentation required. So this allows us to be more responsive to needs, be more timely, and take out some overhead costs at the same time.
In terms of the priorities of CETA, I know that there's been some questions surrounding them today, but I certainly want to just commend CETA for the focus on the 3 points: the increased assurances of food security, the issue of going after protecting the futures of youth and children. That's certainly, I think that's foundational to a lot of these countries turning around and the survival of their communities. And then, of course, the sustained work to provide a sustainable economic future for these areas as well, and certainly want to commend you on those. In terms of the current budget, it was referenced across the way that it was $4 billion. My understanding of that is closer to $5 billion. Is that accurate?
To just review the numbers again, the government has proposed to in its budget that it would increase the international assistance envelope to $5 billion. As I mentioned, CEDA accounts specifically for about 2/3 of that. So yes, CEDA, in the main estimates that are before Parliament, CEDA's proposed budget would be $3.2 billion. There are some portions of that envelope not yet allocated. In most years, CEDA ends up 2/3, 70% of that total amount. But as other members were saying, there are several other departments that draw from that envelope.
Right, right. In terms of the, I guess the issue of partnerships and moving forward with those, I know that there's the 20 countries of focus that we are working towards helping. That's only 80% of the money that's going towards those 20 countries of focus. Is that correct? I know that Kenya actually isn't on one of the countries of focus, but I continue to see, even last summer, the continued works. I think there's some questions surrounding these countries of focus and how other countries may or may not be left out. My understanding is that that's for 80% of the budget, 20% continues to go to priorities in other countries. Is that correct?
Right. It is. If I could offer a little more detail, it is complicated. There are a lot of numbers here. Yeah. I spoke to a little over half of our budget is focused on specific country programs. 80% of that amount is going now to 20 countries, 20 particular countries of focus, chosen for aid effectiveness and alignment with government priorities. The balance of that, the other 20%, about 10% of our total budget, is going to some other countries in smaller amounts. But in addition to that, where we work with Canadian NGOs in a responsive way, some of those funds are not as closely aligned or as closely restricted, and so you could have a Canadian NGO coming in through partnership branch, working in whether it's a Kenya or another country. And then, of course, with that 1/3 to 40% of our budget that's going through the multilateral organizations, significant amounts would be helping any of the poorest countries through, in that case, the African Development Bank, the Global Fund for AIDS, Malaria, quite a variety.
Thank you. We go to the next round of questions. Sorry, what am I doing? Mr. Martin for 8 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome witnesses. Thank you for being here. I'd like to continue somewhat in the vein as my colleague, Mr. McKay from the Liberals, I think where he was going. The purpose of our exercise today is to study the impact of this freeze on departmental budgets such as yours, and to try and gauge the impact in your ability to carry out your mandate. And in your case, your mandate is very special in terms of elevating the standard of living in people overseas and eliminating poverty, etc. And I can't see how the cuts that you've outlined in your report and in our research are possible without a real and dramatic impact in your ability to do that laudable work. Let me start with questioning something from your own piece that you introduced today, Mr. Maloney. You tell us you have approximately 1,950 employees in total, and roughly 170 of them are posted abroad in 49 countries. I was first quite surprised to learn that there's only 170, as I've traveled extensively and met an awful lot of them. It seems like they're all over the place, so I'm a little disappointed, frankly, to learn there's only 170. But the question I have, in the interests of belt tightening and reducing your budget, it must cost a lot more to keep somebody in the field than it costs to keep them, living in Canada and working in downtown Ottawa. Is there a contemplated reduction in the people that you support in the field?
No, there isn't, and to the contrary, the government has been clear that c'est Gatineau, pas Ottawa, but our headquarters, in fact, the government has judged, and certainly other organizations have suggested to us, including the OECD, which looks at aid effectiveness on behalf of all of the donors, there is a strongly shared judgment that while there are costs, and I'll come back to that, that in fact aid effectiveness is certainly benefited by having more staff in the field. Why? So that we can truly understand the circumstances. So that we can.
Experience doesn't really bear that out, though, Mr. Maloney, with all due respect. Out of 1,950 employees, you only have 170 of them in the field. I mean, what
and so
I'm not being critical of your organization, but I can't imagine. That just seems like for an aid organization, it seems like a disproportionate number of them are taking the bus to work in Ottawa or Gatineau, and instead of. Anyway, I'd have to move on as the time is limited. It strikes me in listening to this presentation, it's a contradiction I'd like to ask your view on. That we're borrowing money to give $15 billion worth of tax cuts to the most profitable corporations in the country at the same time as we're cutting and hacking and slashing the budget for CEDA to alleviate world poverty. And I don't think anybody argues that it was the unbridled greed and the wretched excess of the corporate community that caused the economic downfall, that caused all the stimulus spending, which has now caused all the cutbacks. But yet we're borrowing money, $15 billion, to reward that bad behavior in terms of giving further tax cuts. Do you share this? Do you share my criticism of this seeming contradiction, this pretzel logic?
The one part of that that I would speak to is just to say that I do not share the view that CEDA's budget is being slashed. CEDA's the international assistance envelope is being capped. It is growing this year. Will not grow for the next 2 years, and our operating budget is remaining whole.
But your transfer payments are 92.7% of your total budget, so your aid, which is admirable, that's a very cost-effective. I'd love to see most of the money going to aid and as little as possible going to the administration, but our figures here are the actual spending as audited by the Public Accounts Committee in 2008, 2009. Transfer payments were $3,169,000,000, etc. Projected spending for 2010-11 will be $2,924,000,000. That's a significant drop of a couple of $100 million, is it not? Or am I not reading this correctly?
You're reading it correctly. What I'd like to point out is that the main estimates are an initial proposal to Parliament. Last year, for example, between the main estimates and with the addition of supplementary estimates A, B, and C, CEDA received from Parliament an additional $500 million, so that it is, if one looks at main estimates this year compared to main estimates last year, there's actually an increase. And last year's main estimates were larger than the year before.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I guess I would ask then, getting down to the smaller portion of your budget, which is your total operating expenses, you're contemplating a drop in your total cost of your operating budget from $414 million in 08-09 to $229 million in 10-11. Are you trying to make that up in that same $500 million extra transfer in the supplementary estimates? Or do you have to somehow tighten your belt and find $184 million to cut out of your operating budget?
The answer is no. Again, that was an amount that was an accounting amount after the fact. That 160 million of that apparent decline reflects an exchange rate revaluation. In fact, our operating budget this year is extremely close to the operating budget of last year. It's within a couple of $1 million.
Yes, I think I heard you make reference to the exchange rate in answering a previous question. That's right. I didn't quite understand that. Well, Let me ask you a question about personnel then, back to the question
And this should be your
of,
last question, Mr. Martin.
Sorry?
Last question, please.
Last question.
Thank you.
Do you intend a hiring freeze as part of your strategy to cope with the budgetary freeze?
No, we certainly do not. CETA, in fact, currently has a turnover rate of around 10%. That reflects currently 3.5% or so of employees being eligible to retire, although CETA employees do not retire right away. So pardon me?
Just keep on working?
They love their work. So we certainly would even if we were able to find no efficiencies on the non-salary side, which, as I've tried to lay out, we're quite confident we will, CETA certainly needs to hire each year, and we do.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go to the next round of questions. Ms. Holt-Findlay for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. I understand that you're using this 163 saying that it was unusual as other subsidies and payments, and that therefore the budget from 08-09 and 09-10, which we don't have the numbers specifically for, but then projected for 10-11, are actually relatively similar. Two comments to that. One, I still not at all clear where such an extraordinary amount of money just lumps into subsidies, other subsidies and payments. And at some point I would be very interested in having the detail of that. That's a big number to just come into other. And we're not at all clear that that sort of thing might not happen again. And so that if there is a freeze, there's no guarantee that a freeze wouldn't also then have to include unusual circumstances where other things would actually have to then be cut in an operating budget. I would also point out that there are a number of departments that have had significant increases over the last 2 years, and so on a relative basis, CETA has had less than other departments in terms of ability to do what it does. And I am very proud of the fact that Canada has a history of thoughtful diplomacy and balance, such that we have been able to, in fact, involve ourselves in development without, in ways that may have been easier or better for us to do because of that general impression that we had internationally. I mean, anybody can write a check, and we're awfully proud of ourselves as Canadians that we're very fortunate to be as affluent and as advanced as we have, and as we are, and I'm proud of the fact that we've tried to do something, but it's not just writing a check. And so I am concerned that these decreases in CETA's budget over the last 2 years and then a freeze are indicative of a reduction in that Canadian effort. Having said all of that, how are you going to, do you have any analysis so far of where you are going to deal with the freeze? Because a freeze, when you have inflation, which we expect will increase somewhat, you have economic growth, which we know will happen, and you have population growth, is not a freeze, it is a cut. You are going to have to cut certain things in order to address the freeze. What is it of those things that we feel are important that CETA does? What are you planning on cutting? And I know you said we're already engaged in efficiencies, and that's all wonderful, but it's not going to actually deal with the numbers that we're talking about. And I'd also argue if you've already done it, you have that much less room to actually improve even more. So what's the analysis? Where are you going to end up having to cut?
I think there's 3 or 4 things I'd like to very quickly respond to there. First of all, this amount of $163 million in 2008, 2009 in other, I would propose, if the committee liked, that we provide a written explanation of that. I must detail, however, that was not a cut. That was a one-time charge added on for accounting reasons to our normal O&M budget. If I could read 2 numbers to the committee, in the main estimates, our operating our vote 25 this year is proposed at $203 million, 363,000, only 305,000 less than the 203.7 million of 2009-10. So, and that number was quite similar the year before, leaving aside this charge. So those are 2 points. I guess the third point is you're quite right that we do actually have to find $2.2 million to pay our employees, and we need to find those efficiencies. The point of my earlier emphasis on our business processes is that we believe that we can actually deliver the same or better effectiveness by being more efficient, and we will have, but yes, absolutely, we will have to do less non-salary expenditure than otherwise, or we would have to replace slightly fewer of the employees that we would normally replace, given that turnover rate I spoke to.
And a very, very brief question if you have one. If you don't, then we'll proceed to the next one.
Other than pointing out that keeping the same budget is significantly different than other departments that have had significant increases. But thank you.
Monsieur Nadeau, for 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. The feeling I get in the last 4 years, and especially with this last budget, it's as if we're attending a demolition derby of CETA, because it seems that we are ending up, and please excuse this example, I don't mean to offend anyone, it's as if the Mother Teresa of Canada wants to help third world countries going through very difficult situations. So the Canadian Mother Teresa comes in, tries to give them a hand up to help foreign people live better lives. But then I see these cutbacks in professional services of 25%. Regardless of which department you're talking about, every agency and department needs good people to spread their expertise in order to improve the lives of people. But here we are with a situation where professional services are being cut back and transportation and communication are also being cut back, even though these are essential elements to bringing about any aid we want to make. These subsidies to payments, you might tell me, or rather you might tell me that this is not significant, but people are the core of any business. And so again, if you don't have good people with the right expertise, how can you expect CETA to transfer its knowledge to people on the ground and who will transfer that knowledge to their fellow citizens? So, for instance, how can you say that CETA will fulfill its mandate when it has to deal with such severe cutbacks? Well, as I mentioned earlier, what we're dealing with here is a 1% cutback. 1.5% is the normal growth rate of our salaries. That's the salary increase they will get. I'm sorry, Mr. Maloney, as you know, we don't have a lot of time, but when there's a 25% cutback in professional and special services, fine, in the big picture it might not be much, but in terms of the expertise, real human expertise, this is a huge blow. And in my opinion, this expertise lies at the heart of what CETA is all about. Well, I have to point out here that each of those elements doesn't have a separate envelope. The president of CETA and the minister for CETA are free to decide how the money is going to spread about. And they can add monies here or take monies away there if they wish. So for us, it's a matter of finding the best way to deliver our programs. And in fact, as I mentioned a little earlier, we are in the process of implementing a decentralized system. As you've just said, it's important to have knowledge on the ground to be disseminated by people with a lot of expertise. As Minister Oda said, We are reorganizing our staff and removing people around. Well, in that case, are you working with other partners? You said there were 170 CETA employees on Earth. There are a lot of problems on this planet, so really that's not a lot of people. But are there any other federal employees from other departments who will help on the ground, and will they be paid by their own departments, not by CETA? We have full-time employees working for other departments who are on the ground, who are on deployment. It all depends on needs. If CETA has the expertise which is needed on the ground, our employees will go. But sometimes it's also public servants from other departments who go to the ground, who go to a site. And sometimes we have our people, other people on the ground, local people. So we find people based on specific need.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just curious about the international context that Canada finds itself in, given the fact I understand we're at our highest levels of funding for CETA thus far, and have other countries taken steps to reduce their international aid given the global recession? I think I read a report that in the UK we actually saw international aid reduced, where Canada is maintaining these same high levels. Do you have any information you could share with us in conversations with other international aid branches of different governments?
Certainly, it's impossible to predict, to look ahead to see how individual governments and individual countries will respond to their financial circumstances, their fiscal circumstances, but also their priorities. What I can share with the committee, the OECD has published on the 14th of April, published their review of official development assistance in 2009, and very quickly, net ODA, they mentioned, rose in a number of European countries. In percentage terms, the largest increases were in France, 16%, the UK, 14%, Finland, 13%. There were also some very significant aid decreases in other European countries. Many of them double-digit. There were also some major increases outside of Europe, Korea, for example, and some significant decreases, countries like Australia and New Zealand. So certainly individual countries' circumstances and choices generate quite a variety of movements year to year. And of course there's special circumstances as well that show up in these numbers.
And do you know how we measure up compared to other countries in terms of aid as a percentage of our budget?
We do. Our ratio is 0.3. Yeah. Sorry, is the member asking about other countries?
Yes. So first, I was wondering if other countries have curtailed their their international aid spending because of the global economic recession. And the second question I have is, how do we measure up, given our current contributions as a percentage of our budget?
Sorry. So where? We have the number. We're just running it down. So based on the 2009 data, Canada ranked 10th out of the 23 Development Assistance Committee members in terms of our ODA volume, which was down from 9th place in 2008. On the other hand, in terms of the ODA to GNI ratio, Canada moved up a place from 15th to 14th.
Okay. And have there been lessons learned from the last recession in the early 1990s? What was the response during the last recession that Canada had, did we see decreases in international aid spending during like 93, 94, 95?
Well, the last very short recession that Canada had was just prior to the commitment to double. Aid did not grow during that recession. Started to grow the next year.
But during the actual downturn, were there any cuts to see? It's always important, I guess, to learn from previous lessons and how that is dealt with and how adverse the consequences are.
As I said, we would have to check the record to go back to the 1990-91 recession, but we could provide that.
I'd like to thank I know the watch says, but I have something to clarify with Mr. Maloney. I guess in the question that Madame Hall-Finley asked, you promised to give a breakdown. Is that what because we're trying to figure out, did you say you would give a breakdown of the 163,745,000, which comprised 39% of your total operating budget? Is that what you said?
That's correct. In 2008-9, within this other subsidies and payments, there's a significant charge. What's shown is 163,745. We will provide the breakdown and explain the extraordinary charge.
Fair enough. I think, yes, sure.
Possible to get documents from previous recessions distributed to the committee in terms of aid levels?
If they...
Laurier?
What years are you asking for, Mr. Brown?
About 88 to 93.
The most recent ones, yes, 88 to 95, or we weren't in recession 88.
Mr. Maloney, we're not trying to be difficult, but if you have figures that shows a trend in what assistance what has been the curve of the assistance, and if that helps the committee, we would appreciate it.
We certainly can, and we'll use Statistics Canada's definition of recessions.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you for being here. You've been, as you know, this is the study on the freeze envelope and how it's affecting different departments, and we thank you for coming here. And we thank, yes, Mr. Holden.
Well, Madam Chair, sorry, I don't know the process because I'm normally not a member of this committee. I have a motion to move.
We're going to go into committee business. As soon as I hit the gavel, I give a 30-second reprieve, 45-second reprieve. And when we go into committee business,
I can move it then?
Yes, and the first order of business I want to do is finish the report.
Okay.
Thank you. 45 minutes.